Hi, I'm Iona, Assistant Director at the Marble Falls Public Library, and you're listening to Book, Line, and Sinker, a podcast from the staff here at the Marble Falls Public Library. This podcast is all about reading, books, movies, and other topics related to the public library. We're really excited to share our thoughts with you, and we hope you enjoy the show. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. I have Misty with me again, but we have some new librarians with us. First, I'm going to introduce Mary. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I've been at the library for almost 2 years. I'm in charge of the adult programming, so you'll see me at the author events and concerts that we have in the library.
All right, and Brittany, can you tell us about yourself?
Yes, ma'am. So I have now been at the library for 3 years. This is my first job working inside a library. My favorite genre is adult fantasy and sci-fi, so come talk to me about it.
All right, so we have a big group of librarians with us, and we're going to talk about the young adult genre, a genre I am kind of clueless about, so I brought in some experts to kind of tell us about it and tell us why they like it and why it's become so popular. So I guess I just want to start off with describing what is the young adult genre.
I think that the young adult genre is just specifically the age of the character. I was told early on when I started my job here, some very good advice, is that the difference between adult fiction and YA fiction is simply the age of the character. And I think that's proven to be true.
I agree, but I also think because it has a little more freedom with being an adult, young adult, I think it's unique because it reaches all different age groups. Like, even though the characters have a certain age range, I feel like with the young adult fiction, and especially fantasy, the authors just make it so much more entertaining, and I feel like because they're not trying to reach a certain age group, that it really encompasses a lot of stuff.
Spreads the topics out.
It does. But it's also hard too because even though it says YA, there's still some that have very mature content. And so that's kind of when we come in and help, is that come and ask us, and we've pretty much read most of the books in that section. So if you're hesitant, especially with someone starting in the YA section, especially like ages 14 or so, we'll let you know if it's maybe a little too mature.
So do you think there are any like specific guidelines that make something YA?
I was looking that up yesterday. I thought, how can I describe that to where people can understand it? And the general consensus I got when I was looking up what qualifies as a YA, who targets that, it said that when they are writing it, they are targeting the ages of between 12 and 18. Now that's a huge age gap. Well, I mean, 6 years isn't huge, but it's huge in maturity level.
Yeah.
And so you've got 12, which is not that mature, all the way to 18. So like you said, Mary, some of it is some of it's graphic. Some of it's pretty, we've got adults reading this stuff. You have a big range that you're working with. So there are a lot, I feel like it's a lot different from juvenile fiction sometimes because you can kind of deal with a little bit darker themes, especially like dealing with now going into high school and finding out who you are as a person and relationships and that kind of thing. But especially with some of the novels, you can deal with a lot bigger universal themes than you can in juvenile fiction.
Yeah, so a lot of adult fiction has like coming of age novels. And so I wanted to know if there was a difference or if it's just too new that some of the older novels would be considered YA. I just don't see sometimes a big difference. Is it maybe the genre, or is it just is it new?
No, it's been around for a while. I was looking at it yesterday and it was called Catcher in the Rye. It's been around for a long time, and that was one of the very first YAs. That's in the 50s.
But I think it's become more popular recently. I think that with some of the films gearing towards some of the young adults, I think that section of the library has become a lot bigger lately, especially with the rising of Harry Potter.
Right.
That was kind of when the young adult section really took off. I think it was there, but it wasn't really seen.
It's funny because a lot of libraries...
Now it's huge. I mean, it's its own... I don't think it really was considered its own genre before, and I think now it definitely is.
A lot of libraries consider Harry Potter junior fiction.
Yeah, I have seen that. It's in the kids section in some places.
And it's
in the
because
young
I think he
adult.
starts young, but the themes definitely get way darker throughout. That
They start out with a lot smaller books, and it's a lot more juvenile fiction, but then you deal with a lot of, like I said, darker themes as you go on.
good
such
versus
as,
evil.
You know.
All right, so I want to know why y'all like it. Why should we read it? I'm sure there's a lot of reasons between all of y'all. Convince me to read young
I
adult.
like it because they're not jaded by life yet. Like that's why I read them is they always seem like there's hope. They're not they're hopeful. They are good. Most of the time it's good triumphing over evil.
It is, and it has become where they've created really strong female characters to where they see the bad in society and they fight it, and they don't just deal with it. And not that some of these adult fiction books do, but a lot of the adult fiction deals with different, I don't know, I just think the YA really deals with that. I see something bad and I'm going to fight it and I'm going to fix it.
Gonna change
And
it.
I'm going to change it.
Agreed.
And I'm not going to live with it. I'm not going to be
Like
okay with
charge
it. I'm
of
not
it.
going to be dominated by it. And so
Would you
there's
argue
just something
that
about it.
young adult probably has the best leading female characters
I think
recently?
Definitely.
Yes.
Definitely. I think so.
Do you want to describe any of them?
Favorite.
I know. There
We
is.
all three have read. All four of us
They
have read
did.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the reason I wanted to do this podcast with them is because they did convince me to read one YA series. And so we're all talking about the same. Was it Feyre?
Feyre was not a weak stick.
She's not.
Yeah.
But for characters that I think the patrons would relate to, like Katniss,
True.
she's a big one that she saw the bad and she fought it, and she wasn't okay with it. It started with her standing up for her sister and taking kind of her spot, but it ended up her seeing that there's corruption and that she wasn't okay with it.
And she's also a very relatable character.
She is.
Because she starts out very plain, very, she was chosen for it. She didn't choose to get into this conflict. It just kind of chose her. And that's a lot of the times what happens during life.
You can even go as far back as the Fault in Our Stars. I mean, you look at her. That's a very that was a very strong YA book for a long time. Very
Is that
popular.
the John Green?
That's the John Green, and his books tend to be very popular. They fly off the shelves when we get them because they do have characters who I think do what we're talking about. They don't just conform to society. They step out on their own and they make the best of their situations.
And I also think it's really relatable because a lot of teenagers are dealing with these topics that previously wasn't really talked about in a lot of books. And especially with John Green, he talks about, hard topics. The book deals with cancer, and that's, a really big issue that sometimes people don't talk about, but it happens.
Well, and with adult fiction too, I feel like there's a very different genres. There's fantasy, there's reality. There's not much of the mixing, but with YA, they mix it a lot.
mix it all,
And it
yeah.
actually does really well. And I feel like when you pick up a fantasy book, it doesn't always just have to be fantasy-related topics. It kind of meshes real life stuff too, and it does it in a very entertaining way.
Yeah, so what are some predominant themes and genres in YA literature?
I think we've read a whole wide range of them. I mean, we've got the dystopian. You've got the Cinder series, which is a modern take on Cinderella, but she's a cyborg, so it's just, that sounds odd, but it's
does.
great. You've got these...
I've heard of that series, yeah.
You've got kids of all ages who can read that, and so it's just, you've got a lot of the modern twists on
I
these
also
fairy
think
tales.
we've probably read about 90% of the YA fantasy over there.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much that you can do with that. And like Mary said, it's really easy for those authors to blend some of the genres. So you have this dystopian mixed with the fantasy, mixed with the reality, mixed with the really, good plot and character development.
And I think the lessons that are taught in there, I feel like they can really reach different types of topics, like just dealing with morality, good versus evil, self-image, understanding yourself. I mean, they kind of just hit a lot of those things that I feel like our youth really need to learn.
Yeah, so I want to talk about romance in YA, because I feel like that's in a lot of, especially the popular series. There's always the...
You got the mix of it
The
in a lot of it.
romance
So
in
you'll
there.
have it like predominantly fantasy, but you'll have them throwing in a twist of romance. Some of it's a twist, some of it's throughout the whole entire book, and some of it is very graphic. So that's where
There
we
is a
encourage
wide
you
range of romance
to,
over
if
there.
you have a question, is this safe for my 13-year-old? Look, we can't tell you what your kid can read, but we can recommend that, hey, I wouldn't let my 13-year-old read this. And most of us have read something, so don't be scared to ask. That's what we're here for.
The best thing that I've found for novels over there, if I'm kind of worried about recommending it for someone, is going to goodreads.com,
Yes.
looking at reviews. Also on Amazon, they have, tags
Yes.
that have to do specifically with what the book's about. So I would research it if you're concerned about it. There are some really good websites you can go to. Like I said, Goodreads and Amazon are some big ones.
But you'll see adults going over there. I mean, we've got adult women who come in and ask us.
We have men too. The romance isn't always the center point
Yeah.
on some of the books, which I appreciate. Though it's the time when relationships start, and romance is important, of course. But then again, it's for those that maybe just for some reason don't really want to have any romance right now. They don't really think about that kind of thing. Some of it's very subtle. Some of it is dominated more on siblings and family rather than significant others. So with the YA, I think why it's such a popular genre is because there's such a variety. There's for those that don't really care about the romance, and because we have adult men that read them and they don't mind it. They don't mind these characters. And
I remember as a teen being boy crazy and loving the kind of splash of romance, and I've since then become a fan of romance, and I think that genre gets put in a lesser category, and so I wonder, because like with Hunger Games, since we were talking about that, a lot of people focused on the Peeta and Gale love triangle, and I wonder if that's why people sometimes put YA in a lesser category, because it's often tied with the big hit titles with a splash of romance when there's really all these themes that are more dominant.
I was going to ask you guys this because it was a thought when I was reading this over. Do you think that the romance, why it's such a hit, is because it's not all fluffy? It's not all, it's not poof and happiness, and it's real.
Not. It's real. It's them finding each other and struggling with each other and creating a relationship through probably going through a really dark time, which I think really builds a strong relationship. So it doesn't start out all cute and cuddly. It starts out with
that conflict.
two teens who just don't know what to do, and they're stuck in this terrible society, and they fight through it together, and then it creates a bond. And I think that creates a really strong relationship rather than just, I like you, you like me,
let's go walk on the beach together.
Yeah, and with all these series, you can't just have someone end up happily ever after at the end, which is kind of a big thing with romance, is you get the happily ever after. But you can't span that over 4 genres after the first book, because then it just wouldn't be as interesting to keep going. Which is kind of where I want to go in with series versus standalone YA novels, because we mentioned John Green, and he doesn't really do series. His novels are standalone, but I think a lot of the popular YA books that are being turned into movies that people are reading are series. So kind of, is it dominated by series, or is it just, I have no clue about it?
I see it dominated.
There are a lot of series over there.
There's a lot. And it's kind of your preference. I mean, I kind of enjoy both. Right now I'm kind of hating these waiting a year for the next book and constantly being just on the edge of what's going to happen. Sometimes I like the standalones. I like conclusions. But then again, sometimes you get so hooked into a story and a character that you don't want it to end.
And I think the pull for series is you get so much character development, so you start to care about what happens. You want to find out what happens next. And so with a standalone novel, that's kind of hard, and sometimes you can miss that characterization that actually makes you care about the story.
Do you think it keeps younger people reading?
I do.
Definitely. I think it makes them excited. Can't wait for the next one.
Keeps younger and older people reading.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, we have patients all the time. When's the next one?
Listen, you're behind
Not
me,
another
okay?
year.
But I think it's also, too, you've got the relationships that are building, and I love it when you have an author who completely blindsides you. Okay, for instance, we're not going to name the series, but y'all know when I say Tamlin, who saw that coming? So you have to understand that. You saw it coming?
You did not. I did see it coming, but only because I hated Tamlin so much. No author can make me hate a character that much and then have them end up together. I'm sorry. That they just can't do that to me.
Okay.
Well, I was blindsided, so I was
came
completely
in
shocked.
Strong hate for Tamlin, so I was really glad it worked out. And I was really tempted to read spoilers about it because.
Did you read spoilers about it?
No, I just asked y'all and got y'all to spill stuff to me.
You can't ask Misty. Misty will give it away with her face.
Did I give it off my face?
I'm just kidding. No, we all are terrible at hiding it.
So since we're reading, or we're talking about a book that I think is more of an adult book, but it's considered young adult, what age should be reading YA? When do you think a parent should introduce their child to the YA section?
I would say 13, 14.
I think really when they just start outgrowing the juvenile section, when things are not exciting. I don't want them to get bored. I don't want them to lose interest in reading because they're stuck in a certain section. But it's a hard transition because the YAs are just, they're so all over the place. And so that's when I think it really helpful to talk to us.
Yeah,
I don't think it's fair to label age over there, at least in my opinion, because I have some 10-year-olds who have read through Rick Riordan like it was nothing, and they come to me asking for help, and I've put them on Michael Vey, and they love the Michael Vey series. If you have not read it, it's by Richard Paul Evans. He's really great for boys, keeping that interest going when they're fresh off of Rick Riordan. So I think it's just what you feel you're ready for, and come talk to us. I can't put him in that box and go 13 and up.
It's a tough age to be at because I think in all places of life you're kind of in the in-between. You're not an older teen. You're not a kid. I want there to be clear options for that age group because that's when you get people hooked or they lose interest in reading either forever or until they're older.
Right. Not everything is graphic over there.
Yeah,
not everything is inappropriate.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great ones, and so I think they need to constantly be challenging themselves, and I don't want them to lose interest in reading just because they have to be in a certain age group or age section. I mean, and so that's when I think I encourage parents to be okay with them transitioning to that genre, that they're not all graphic. There are some that are probably could be in juvenile, if we're honest. So I recommend them at least trying to let them move up.
And that's why you have your local librarian out to help you. And we have a bunch of young adult fans here, so don't be shy to come to the desk. So before we end, is there anything else we want to say about the young adult genre?
So I really like YA novels because I'm still not at the point, I'm 24. I don't even really consider myself an adult yet even. So it's hard for me to relate to a lot of the adult characters. I've never been able to get into like police procedurals and legal thrillers and that kind of thing, which are super popular for adults. I think because YA characters haven't really gotten into a career yet, it can be more universal. And because I'm not a cop and I'm not a lawyer or I'm not a journalist, I can't really relate to those characters, and it makes it hard for me to get into that kind of book. But with YA, you get a little bit more freedom because you're not put in that box of, oh, I'm in this certain field, I only deal with this kind of stuff. And like Mary said, it blends a whole bunch of different stuff, which makes it really interesting and keeps you going and keeps you interested.
I think it's just an escape for me because a lot of the adult fiction is kind of close to reality and close to what's going on in our world. And not that that's not important, but that's not what I want to spend my evenings reading about. I have to listen to the news, I have to see all the heartbreak in the world, and so sometimes I just need a book that's not close to home, just a new world, a new character, something that I can just be entertained by and forget kind of the bad out there. Because that's what our news is pretty much dominated by.
I think you and I are on the exact same track. We deal with too much throughout the day. Responsibilities, adulting, and that's why I think that I love the YA. I'm not going to say my age, but I am not 24. So I am a significant amount older and I do not care. I will read YAs until I die. I'll probably be rocking it when I'm 90 years old reading YA because I don't want to deal with reality. That's me.
Mm-hmm.
I like to escape, and that's why I read. If I want to go somewhere and live through Thera, I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank y'all so much for coming on the podcast and telling us about the young adult genre. It's pretty awesome. I hope people get into it. Even if I'm not into it, I just want people to read and be happy and joyous about reading. And so next week, me and Amanda are going to talk about food and drink. We're going to talk about cookbooks, cocktail books, and all that fun stuff to go with the cooking world. So thank you for joining us.
Bye.